What's going on, guys? Vulkan here, and today we are back in V-Rising for another video. So this time around, we're talking about the top 10 things that you want to do first when you jump into V-Rising for the first time. Now, these fit both PvE and PvP servers, so no matter what you choose, these should hold up. Okay, so let's get started with number one, and that's choosing the right place to set up your castle. So in V-Rising, you need to create your castle pretty much as soon as you get out of the tutorial. And in this game, you can set up your estate really wherever you want. But just so you know, not all locations are created equal. There are some great advantageous things to look out for depending on what you want to do. So for instance, players cannot swim. So any body of water is going to be a natural wall for you to protect your base. Castles can be created on plateaus, which then gives you multiple levels to build on, and it helps funnel enemies to certain entrances instead of giving them multiple walls to try to breach. So using your environment is a big thing when you're actually creating your castle. So let's take a look at this screenshot. Now, this is one I took from beta. So there are 3 castles that other players have set up. Now, one of them is in a fantastic spot. You have a total of 3 entrances to get to the castle. Now, the first one was walled off with a gate, but because there's a body of water and a cliff, you couldn't get around to the back of the fort. It just created a natural blockage. Then the other 2 entrances were both small paths through some rocky terrain. Now, these were both blocked off with gates, and again, it gave this player the entire area to build within with very little risk of attack from other players. Then we have the other 2 castles. So the one in the middle is okay. It's sort of in a big clearing, which meant it took a lot of resources to create a secured base than the other 2. And then the one on the far right was built into the side of a cliff and against that small pond. Again, this gave some fantastic natural defenses, and it kept me from getting too close. So as you can see, going through and picking where you want to set up your castle is incredibly important from a siege standpoint, but also from a utility standpoint, because there's random portals scattered around the map that you can use to teleport. So if you want to, you can set up your castle near one of these to make traveling a little bit more convenient until you get your personal teleporter in your castle. So let's go ahead and move into number 2, mist braziers and their huge impact early on. So when you first create your castle, it will not have a roof. I mean, it's just basically a little wooden fort that provides 0 shade, meaning if you don't build it near a shady area, you won't be able to work in your fort while the sun is up, unless you have mist braziers. These are incredibly low cost things that you can build. They consume bones and they create shade. Now, why do you want these? Well, this is going to allow you to continue to work in your fort all around the clock. Now, these don't take too much to maintain. You just put some bones in, you turn it on. These consume 1 bone per minute, which is actually pretty good considering you can get a few hundred bones pretty quick. And you can also toggle them off when the sun has set. That way you can save your bones. But honestly, I didn't have any issues, right? I just left them on the entire time. I put bones in whenever I went back to my castle. And then once you start to build up your castle and add a roof, you won't need them as often. I still have one in my garden, but for the most part, they're just there early on. So that way you can build your fort and actually spend some time while the sun is up. So let's move into number 3. This one is pretty straightforward, but it's something that I definitely want to touch on because this is a survival game. Make sure to gather as much lumber, stone, animal hide, and bones as you possibly can. You're going to need tons of this over the first few hours in terms of crafting. Now, I made it a rule to spend a few nights in full harvest mode early on. That way I had a huge inventory of materials to craft all of my upgrades. Now, number 4 brings us to our first upgrade we're going to make, and that's copper weapons. You need to get these as soon as you possibly can. Bone and reinforced weapons are great to start off with, but honestly, they lose their effectiveness really, really quickly. So you want to make sure you push towards copper as hard as you can. The reason here is not only do they give increased stats and deal more damage, but they also give you your first weapon skill. And these are great for clearing out enemies, dealing with certain bosses, or dealing increased damage. And if you're looking for copper ore, there's a big bandit copper mine towards the northern central area of Farbane Woods. Now, I mentioned V-Blood units, and that is our number 5. So I would highly recommend killing the Alpha Wolf V-Blood unit first. So this guy will allow you to transform into a wolf and increase your movement speed by 45%, which doesn't seem that great, but early on, when you don't have another form of transportation, this is so nice. It's so nice. So I opted to tackle the Frost Archer first because I wanted a crafting station, and I ended up regretting it because I was moving super slow across the map, and then the first hour I spent, it wasn't great because, again, I was moving so slow from point to point to point. So going and taking care of the Alpha Wolf is probably your best bet. because you're going to get that increased movement speed, and it just makes things go much quicker for you. Now, for our number 6, at this time, I would definitely go ahead and recommend crafting a vampire lockbox. This is a special storage container. It's locked against other players. Now, this is especially good if you're on a PvP server and you want to protect your precious resources early on, because all of your other lockboxes can be looted. Somebody gets into your castle, they can loot all of your lockboxes except for this one. Now, if you aren't on a PvP server, this is just another large storage box for you to use. That way you can hold more stuff. Now, one thing I did want to point out is that in V Rising, your first hour, you have a protection. So your first hour of playing, you can't be ganked, you can't engage in PvP activities or any of that stuff. So you need to make the most out of this first hour. And creating a vampire lockbox is like super priority, because you're going to be able to build a fort, but if people decide to breach that fort, you don't want to have all of your resources gone. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. Now on to number 7. So if killing the Alpha Wolf is number 1, then taking on the Frost and Chaos Archers is number 2 and 3 in my opinion. These are going to give you some very important unlocks for your castle. So the Chaos Archer is going to give you the Devourer, which is a salvaging station. So here you can place weapons or materials that you don't need, and you can have them crushed down into raw materials. So this is good for breaking down extra weapons you have, but also for breaking down fish into things like fish oil and fish bones, which are needed for some pretty important recipes. So getting these early on is going to be super important. Now the Frost Archer gives access to the tannery, which will allow you to turn animal hide into leather, which again is very extremely important for lots of weapon and armor crafting. So getting this one is going to be super important when it comes to growing your character and being able to take on stronger challenges, because you won't be able to craft better armor and better weapons until you get leather. Now for number 8, this one is a little bit of like a personal preference, but I would recommend taking out Rufus after the archers. So taking out Rufus the Foreman is going to give you a crossbow recipe. Now the crossbow isn't going to be as strong as some of the other weapons in my opinion, but it's very useful for pulling enemies, or drawing enemies into the shadows. And by taking out Rufus, you're going to get a 9 gear score hunter's crossbow that'll work out for quite a while you clear Farbane Woods. Now for number 9, this one plays a little bit into number 3, but once you have a solid set of weapons and skills, you want to raid that bandit copper mine that I told you about. This area is packed full of enemies, but you have so many copper veins to harvest, and this was a staple farming spot for me each night so I could craft enough copper ingots to then fuel my progression. Plus, you have some really, really good chances at getting merciless recipe drops here, which are better versions of a gear set. So things are kind of split between your normal gear set, then you'll get a merciless recipe, which will be an increased variant of that gear set. So for instance, Night Stalker set, merciless Night Stalker set, green armor versus blue armor. And at some point, getting these drops is going to be the only form of progression you can have while you're trying to level up your character, or gear them up rather. Now, number 10 is our last one, guys. So this is a big one when it comes to your castle. Create an enclosed workshop with matching floors as soon as you can. It takes a lot of resources, but when you have your crafting stations in a closed off castle room, so all walls with an archway to enter, and you have a workshop floor installed, so no more grass, it's all actual flooring, you get a 25% increased crafting speed buff and a 25% decrease in crafting cost. And this means the world when you get to things like iron ingots, which take 3 minutes to make each. So being able to shorten that time as much as possible is going to keep you moving along. So everybody, I hope that you enjoyed this video and these 10 things to help you get started. These were all things I wrote down as I explored V Rising for the very first time, but I want to hear from you guys. After you've played, are there any things that you would change? Do some of these not make sense? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. As always, this has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you guys next time.
Sound off one another.